look at this international context, we also see a big headwind coming from across the Atlantic in the form of the Donald Trump administration in Washington, D.C. And it's been very interesting, I think, to observe the reaction, particularly in the media establishment in South Africa. There's a lot of righteous indignation from the government, as you would expect, a lot of defiance, which I think is a very bold choice of actions in response to the United States. But the kind of the reflex is, well, we won't be bullied. We're going to look elsewhere, and we have BRICS partners behind us, and we want to establish this new world order, which is at odds with the Washington consensus. You can argue whether the Washington consensus still exists anymore under Donald Trump. But many of the things that the Trump administration is saying are the types of topics that we've been talking about today in this conversation: the ratcheting up of race-based laws, diluting of private property rights through the Expropriation Act.
Factual.
Yeah. And the locus of control is with us as South Africans. We can choose to abandon these hostile policies. And I think Donald Trump his great crime is to point out that the emperor has no clothes in South Africa.
You would have read James Myburgh from Politics Web put out a great little post on this about the ANC broadcasting on two channels. There's a channel for the domestic audience and a which is race-based. It's about the need for ongoing and endless kind of supposed redress, but really it's a kind of national democratic revolution broadcast. And then channel 2 is for the rest of the world, which is we're a constitutional democracy. We respect property rights. We don't have race-based discrimination. All this kind of stuff. And James kind of pointed out the Trump administration is dialed now into channel 1. It's seeing the truth, and there's a lot of people, both within and outside the government domestically, that just really resent the outside world dialing into channel 1 and seeing the South African story for what it is: a dysfunctional economy. People talk about 1% growth. That's actually not true. This is a stagnant economy that falls in per capita terms and has fallen in per capita terms for a decade and a half.
Yeah, if you're not growing, you're going backwards.
In dollar terms, global purchasing power terms, even further backwards. Totally dysfunctional state-owned enterprises. Towns, Dave, towns, not one street villages, but proper towns across this country have utterly failed. We're talking economies that have perhaps dropped in half, maybe more, maybe by 2/3 to 70%. Just the disappearance. I mean, I'm talking in the worst case scenarios, but just infrastructure gone, businesses vacated, municipal governments unfunded and totally dysfunctional, gangsterism moving into these vacuums. You get people who hear Trump's executive orders and his description of what's going on in South Africa, and they'll take a selfie on Table Mountain and joke about, look how hard life is. Trump's obviously wrong because look how hard life is for us in South Africa.
The following week, they're complaining about the water outages and the electricity going.
They don't see what's going on in large parts of this country. They live in the urban centers where there is growth because there's depression everywhere else. And there's this huge influx into the urban space. And so, there's activity.
But it's very temporary. It's artificial.
And not only that, we might get into this in a bit, but that in itself is putting enormous strain on the metros. And so the metros, which were always the functional kind of parts of government, and it was these smaller municipalities that were failing, the metros are starting to undergo a kind of rolling failure. Joburg experiences this on all sorts of dimensions. You get better run metros like Cape Town, but nonetheless with significant challenges and a huge strain of population influx. Same with Durban, same with Pretoria, same with the East Rand and so on. So it's just been incredible to see that kind of backlash, and I think there's something kind of emotive and guttural there where people don't like that the story is unraveling. the reality's unraveled a while back, and now the story's unraveling, and there's a kind of cognitive dissonance there, and a wrestling with that. And they don't like it that it's coming from someone that they don't like. You know, they might not like Mr. Trump, and so they don't like the message. But the message is undeniable, and we know that because that's actually very much common knowledge domestically. But somehow when foreigners say it, then we kind of get defensive. And that's been interesting to see. Perhaps to some extent that's a natural kind of nationalistic, civic nationalism that's happening. If that can be harnessed for reform, so that, you know, in other words, if the energy could be, let's make things here so that Trump is actually wrong. Fantastic. You know, let's prove the American president wrong.
See it as a challenge.
Yeah. But at the moment, what we've seen in several respects, the initial response to this international pressure is kind of a verbal doubling down. We've seen the signing recently of the Expropriation Act, the proposed introduction of all kinds of new ancillary policies to that will undermine property rights, and several other things going on. We are seeing an escalation of what we call the third wave of BEE. We've got an explainer video on that, so we don't have to get too much into the weeds on that now. We can point people to that in the description perhaps, but this is, you know, this is what's going on. And so to say that this is kind of misinformation, this is the big word that's being thrown around at the moment. Yeah, this is all misinformation, you know, is I think completely bogus. And we have to recognize that this international recognition, this international dialing into channel one, it might not feel so nice, but it's very healthy and it's very important.